Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. This is the Inept General bringing you a Tomb King unit stat comparison video. In this video, guys, I'll be giving my opinions on some of the Tomb King units now that I can talk about having had a chance to play some of them, and we'll compare some of their stats to units of other factions within Total War Warhammer so far. So, without holding us up too much, let's just kick things straight off, and we'll start to have a look at the legendary lords. The first one, of course, being Settra the Imperishable. Now, Settra is a great guy, but he does have magic, but he is mounted here on his chariot, and these are his chariot stats when he's on the Chariot of the Gods. Now, he's a good melee fighter as well, so I tried to compare him to other good melee magic users within Total War Warhammer, and this is kind of what I wanted to have a look at him against. So I also threw in Arkhan the Black here, who's another one of the Tomb King legendary lords, because he is also a spellcaster on a chariot as his mount, as his sort of best mount. And, you know, it's kind of interesting because he's also armored and anti-infantry, and although probably not as good a fighter as Settra, he's also a magic user. So I just threw him up here, and I figured we'd do two birds with one stone. And the guys we're going to compare them against are Malekith. Now, this is Malekith on the Cold One chariot rather than his dragon. So bear those stats in mind. And this is Archaon the Everchosen on his mount as well. Now, if we have a look at it, as far as health is concerned, Settra is by far and away the highest up there with a good amount at like 7,452. Now, leadership-wise, he's also up there with the top of them, along with Malekith and Archaon. Speed, 84. Same speed as Arkhan on his chariot, and they absolutely gas Malekith and Archaon the Everchosen on their respective mounts. Now, melee attack, magic, and fire at 50. That's way better than Arkhan the Black, way better than Malekith. Not as good as Archaon, but Archaon doesn't have flaming, although I suppose maybe his sword actually does give him that. But I'm not 100% sure on that. And he does have melee at 70. So Archaon the better fighter there. Melee defense, 30. Arkhan's better melee defense. Arkhan along with Malekith sitting around 35. And the Everchosen at 60. Weapon strength, 420, pretty good. Both better than Arkhan and Malekith. Not better than Archaon with 530. Charge bonus 100 with that Chariot of the Gods. That was always going to be the highest. Charge bonus for Arkhan isn't bad at 75. Malekith is pretty good on the Cold One Chariot at 80 and Archaon at 90. So Settra the Imperishable running away with it there. So in a head-to-head with their mounts, I'm really not sure who would walk away. I think it would be between Settra and Archaon. But then with magic users, it's so hard to tell. And it just depends how you use the magic and stuff like that. So it's the best comparison. Legendary Lords are always just a bit of fun to speculate on. But, you know, it's always hard to compare them just because they have so many different abilities that they can trigger. Next one, we have Khalida. Now, she's a duelist, so we tried to look at other duelists, but obviously she has a mount of one of the Necropolis knights, the Asp statues brought to life. Now, because she has a mount, it's kind of tricky. So the only real comparison to her on a mount is probably Tyrion, who is also a duelist. But I also threw in a couple of other duelists as well. So we've got Queek and Prince Sigvald on foot. But Tyrion's probably the fairest comparison. Now, we have the 5,404 for Queen Khalida, 4,900. Now, she actually has the most health of all of these duelists we've listed here. So Sigvald and Queek falling behind a little bit there. But her armor is also the lowest, only at 90, compared to Tyrion's 125, Sigvald's 100, and Queek's 110. Leadership 80, second lowest after Queek. And speed 66, that's her on her mount. So Tyrion's horse is much faster, and the other two boys aren't mounted, so they're not going to be able to compare in speed. Melee attack 65 plus poison. So that's the same as Prince Sigvald, except she does poison, a little better than Queek, and below Tyrion. Melee defense 60, same as Tyrion, same as Sigvald. All of them have a higher melee defense than Queek. Weapon strength 450. You know, yeah, pretty low, just really only beating Queek in that respect. Charge bonus 70, you know, for the mounted, not as good. Now, she does have a lot of the poison ability and stuff like that, so how that would play, and she does have armor piercing. So worth bearing both of those things in mind. Now, in a head-to-head with her and Tyrion, I think even with the extra life, my guess would be Tyrion would take it, even with the abilities and stuff. And I think, because you can just kind of run away from Sigvald and Queek, it's a hard comparison to make, but you guys can draw your own conclusions there. Next up, we have Grand Hierophant Khatep. Now, this is him on, not his top mount, I think, is classified as the Chariot, but we put him on the Casket of Souls because I love the idea of a wizard on an artillery piece, and one of the better artillery pieces in the game as well. So that's a fascinating little mount for him to have, and it can move around. It's not the quickest. Now, he's a pure wizard. He is not a fighter, so we really have to compare him to pure wizards, but because he is uniquely on that artillery piece, it's kind of hard to do. So, I mean, really all we have, I'm just going to throw up Teclis and Morathi up here, just to give you an idea of like where he stacks up strength-wise against other wizards. Now, he's a bit better armored. His leadership is a little bit lower. His speed on that artillery piece is obviously fairly slow. These are both of these guys mounted as well, Teclis and Morathi. Melee defense 28, that's lower than the rest of them. Melee attack 28, melee defense 20, lower than both of those other guys as well. Weapon strength, however, 350, that is higher than both of them, although it doesn't have the anti-large and armor piercing that Morathi does. Charge bonus on that piece of equipment is only 8. Ammunition, that's all to do with the fact that he is an artillery piece. So you know what? I think if you're putting him into combat, you're losing anyway. So it's a hard thing to judge. Just use his magic as best you can. And with him an artillery piece, doubly useful. A mage casting sort of massively ranged attacks. Although you probably wouldn't want him that far away from your troop body. You want to keep him kind of close so he can cast off his magic and help out all the troops around him as well. So, and can I say that the Casket of Souls is a very versatile piece of artillery equipment, so you can tuck it in quite tight, and because it fires so high up and it arcs so severely, that it is pretty good at hitting even troops engaged in combat, and it is good at firing without much clearance in front of it as well. So, pretty handy for him to be on, and you can still be involved in all the combat as well. So let's get on to the infantry now of the Tomb King army, and we'll kick things off, at the bottom of the totem pole with the skeleton warriors we see here with their lovely shields, and we'll compare them to, come equally rubbish, shall we say, troops. So really, as a point of comparison, we've got them against skeleton warriors, which are the vampire count variant. We've got them against clan rats here, and we've got them against swordsmen of the empire. Now, the clan rats, and full disclosure here, my fault, guys, a little error on my part. The clan rats and the swordsmen might not be the latest stats. I pulled these from previous stat comparison things I've done, so forgive me if they're slightly off with the numbers, but it should give us a rough idea. The skeleton warriors is taken from the latest version of the game, so that's how they stand as well. So exactly the same health. The vampire count skeleton warriors on the right hand side have slightly better armor, but they have less missile resistance. Their leadership is the same. The vampire count skeletons are a little bit quicker. They have the same melee attack, same melee defense, same weapon strength, and the vampire counts have 1 extra charge bonus. But it's weird that the skeleton warriors for the vampire counts aren't classified as meat shields, but the skeleton warriors of the Nehekharans and the Tomb Kings are. But yeah, just worth bearing in mind, they're really kind of comparable. So if you know what the skeleton warriors can do in the game, then you know what the skeleton warriors for the Tomb Kings can kind of do as well. Skeleton Spearmen next. Apologize if you can hear a rumbling in the background, guys. That's, I think, something coming from downstairs. Someone's doing some drilling or something. But we have Skeleton Spearmen. So, of course, let's compare them to the Vampire Count Skeleton Spearmen primarily. We chucked in some Ungor Spearherd and some Goblins. Again, the Spearherd and the Goblins might not be the latest stats. I apologize if that's wrong, but I thought it might be a fair comparison. Now, as far as them versus the Vampire Count Spearmen go, again, the armor differential is the same, but really everything else is kind of identical. The difference between the armor and the missile resistance is kind of the same there, just to make them a little bit different. But other than that, kind of exactly the same. Although, having said that, it doesn't actually look... Oh no, they do have... I think they do have charge resistance. It just hasn't said it in their descriptor there for the Skeleton Spearmen for the Tomb Kings. I think that's the icon, the second on the right, if I'm not mistaken. So yeah, that's that there. So I think they do have charge defense against large. It's just not written down. Tomb Guard now. We're getting into probably the most elite, like, regular infantry that the Tomb Kings have. So let's compare them to, like, you know, some other stuff around. So we'll take it against the Vampire Counts again, and that's against the Grave Guard. Now, and the Storm Vermin with Shields and the Chaos Warriors to give us an idea. Now, again, all three of these might not be the Grave Guard, the Storm Vermin, and Chaos, again, from a previous stat comparison video I did, rather than taking it fresh from the game's most current version. But I think it should give us a good idea anyway. A few things might be off, and again, I apologize for that. But they look like they have about the same number as a Grave Guard unit does. Both of them armored and shielded and anti-infantry. The Grave Guard have better armor. They look like they have about the same missile resistance there. Leadership slightly better with the Tomb Guard. Speed the same. Melee attack, better for the Tomb Guard. Melee defense, better for the Tomb Guard versus the Grave Guard. Weapon strength, better for the Tomb Guard than the Grave Guard. And charge bonus, exactly the same. So all in all, Tomb Guard a little bit better than Grave Guard. Now, you compare them to stuff like the Storm Vermin, particularly looking at stuff like melee attack and melee defense. Storm Vermin, worse melee attack, and I think worse melee defense as well. And they have less health. But the armor for the Storm Vermin is higher, much like the Grave Guard. And the Storm Vermin are, of course, quicker as well, and have a much higher charge bonus. But they do have a lower weapon strength. So it might be an interesting fight, because the Storm Vermin do have those extra units as well. They can maybe get around the edges of the Tomb Guard a little bit. It'd be an interesting matchup, that one. And against the Chaos Warriors, with the melee attack, worse than the Chaos Warriors for the Tomb Guard, and melee defense as well. They do have a lot more health and a lot more units, or 20 more units than the Chaos Warriors. And the charge bonus for the Chaos Warriors is better, and the weapon strength for the Tomb Guard is actually better. So again, Tomb Guard can probably stand their ground against this kind of tier of warrior. I mean, they wouldn't stand a chance against Chosen or anything more elite like that, but against this kind of tier, I think they're in good company. Now, Tomb Guard with halberds, they are shielded halberd variants, so we kind of went for that. So we took Empire Halberdiers, Storm Vermin, and Temple Guard. And yeah, you know, kind of comparable. Really, the only other shielded halberdier is the Temple Guard. But the rest is, you know, kind of comparable. In terms of health, they have the most health, even beating out the Temple Guard, which is impressive. And in terms of leadership, yeah, they're kind of up. They're on the lower tier of the leadership for this tier of unit. Speed 28, they're the slowest of them. Melee attack 25, kind of the same as the Empire Halberdiers. Melee defense 47, that's the highest of all of them. Weapon strength 29, second only to the Temple Guard at 42. And charge bonus pretty low compared to the rest of them. But they do have anti-large, armored and shielded. No armor. Yeah, they do have armor piercing, just hasn't been written down. And they do have charge defense as well. So yeah, halberds pretty solid. Again, Tomb Guard, solid, nowhere near the top tier of infantry you can get in the game, but they can hold their own comparatively. I think the Temple Guard would probably take them. I think Temple Guard are a bit more efficient, but that's to be expected, slightly. But that's the Tomb Guard for you. Skeleton Archers next. Now, let's compare them to some other kind of arch units. Again, these three not from the most modern version of the game, but forgive me for that, but it gives us an idea. Now, range, and for missile units, let's not get into all the melee defense, melee attack. It's not really that important. I mean, on the whole, they look like they're about the same as Peasant Bowmen. There's two difference in, I think, weapon strength, and yeah, for the rest of it, they're the same as Peasant Bowmen. They have a bit more health and a lot more numbers. Their range is less than Peasant Bowmen, however, and their missile damage is less as well. They have the same ammunition. Compared to Gobbo Archers, I think that's kind of the... they have the same missile damage as Night Goblin Archers, but they don't have the poison that Night Goblin Archers do, and of course have that much better range as well. And they do less damage than the Sea Guard, and I imagine less damage than a few of the other... Elven Archers, and they won't have the range to match the Elves Archers either. So they can hold their own. Peasant Bowmen have a range benefit on them. Humans and Elves will have a range advantage on them. Now let's move on to the cavalry. Sorry, excuse me. And we have the Skeleton Horsemen, Kind of like just your fast cav, so let's see what Mounted Yeomen and Illyrian Reavers, again, not from the latest version of the game, you can probably tell by the way they look by now, but it gives us an idea. Let's have a look at the important stuff. Speed, way slower than the Mounted Yeomen, and way slower than the Illyrian Reavers as well. Melee attack 22, that kind of matches the Yeoman. 26 melee defense matches the Yeoman. 25 weapon strength, very close to the Yeoman, very close to the Reavers as well. Charge bonus 26, very close to the Mounted Yeoman. Really just a slower, less armored version of the Mounted Yeoman, really. That's kind of where they stand at the moment. For the Skeleton Horsemen. Now, good for chasing down missiles. I wouldn't necessarily use them in a cavalry exchange unless it was very early in the campaign or anything like that. They do have a good amount of health, though, and you know, they do benefit from the regen. They do have Vanguard, of course, as well as all of these other light cavalry units do. So, yeah, let's move on from the Skeleton Horsemen to the Skeleton Horsemen Archers. And again, these three aren't from the latest version of the game, but we'll use them as comparisons. So we have the Mounted Yeoman. Range, let's start looking at stuff like range. Range, much better for the Skeleton Horsemen Archers. Missile damage, lower. Ammunition, lower. And, you know, speed, slower than the Mounted Yeoman, slower than the Glade Riders, slower than the Dark Riders, for sure. So when it says very fast, not actually very fast for the Skeleton Horsemen Archers. And now we have the Nehekhara Horsemen. These guys are kind of the upgraded knights of the Tomb King army. Not the sort of Necropolis knights, but they're kind of a bit better in melee. So we'll compare them to some, you know, kind of basic tier cavalry in some of the other factions. Now they have a little bit more health than some of these others, with beating out all of them actually. Yeah, the highest health of all of these units. Lower armor, however. And they do have about the same leadership as Black Knights, the other undead. About a little bit quicker than Black Knights. Melee attack, a little bit better than Black Knights. Melee defense, better than Black Knights. Weapon strength, the same as Black Knights. Charge bonus, 1 less than Black Knights. Now, you compare them to sort of Empire Cav. They don't have as good a charge bonus. Their weapon strength is higher. Melee attack and defense is better. And their speed is quicker as well. So they could probably beat out a unit of Empire Knights. And Silver Helms might be a bit more of a challenge because Silver Helms have that extra health as well. And we're looking at, yeah, the extra armor for the Silver Helms. Leadership better for the Silver Helms. Speed the same for both of them. Melee attack, kind of, yeah, low, higher for the Silver Helms. Melee defense, higher for the Nehekhara Horsemen. Weapon strength, higher for the Tomb Kings. So, yeah, you know, comparable to these guys. Could take out quite easily Emperor Knights. Think would beat Black Knights. Might struggle a bit against Silver Helms, shielded Silver Helms there, rather than the basic version of Silver Helms. So, yeah, that's the comparison there. Skeleton Chariots. Now, Skeleton Chariots are a bit unique in that there are 12 units, 12 chariots in a unit, which is higher than any other chariot unit we've seen in the game so far. And I think that's their reflection of how on the tabletop version of the game, you were able to bring effectively unlimited chariots, whereas other factions would be limited by the number of chariots they could bring. They were kind of capped set because they were considered more elite troops, whereas for the Tomb King army, they're considered basic troops. So it's kind of nice to see that reflected in Total War Warhammer. But for the chariots, we're just going to go for the kind of melee-focused chariots here. So we've got the Aphilmar chariot, the Orc Boar chariot, and the Razor Gore chariot. Now, it has way less armor. They have a bit more health than both the Aphilmar and Orc Boar, but there's so many more units that each unit has far less than any one of those guys. And, yeah, well, less armored, worse leadership, speed, better than both the Orc Boar and the Razor Gore, not as quick as the Aphilmar chariot. Melee attack 22, that's about on par with the Boar chariot and the Razor Gore chariot. Melee defense 24, again a little bit worse than the Boar and Razor Gore, and a lot worse than the Elven chariot. And weapon strength 34, and that's the lowest of them all. Charge bonus 52, again the lowest of them all. So I've struggled, actually, with my experience of the game so far to use the Skeleton Chariots effectively. I think what you're looking to do is charge low-tier infantry but it's much harder to pull these guys out of combat than it was some of these larger chariots. I think that's a mass issue against the units. So you do tend to get bogged down with them more so. And chariots, even at the best of times, need a lot of micros. So maybe I'm just not, I know exactly what's wrong. I'm just not good enough a player to make the most out of the skeleton chariots. But somewhere, someone out there will be an absolute machine in multiplayer with these skeleton chariots, I'm sure. And we have the skeleton archer chariot, so let's compare it to other missile chariots. So you've got the goblin wolf, the Tyrannok chariot, and the cold one chariot. Now, armor is about the same, a little bit higher than the goblin, and about the same as the Tyrannok chariot. Lower than the cold one chariot, however. Leadership, again, better than the goblin wolf, lower than the other two. Speed, worst of them all, a little bit quicker than the cold one chariot. Melee attack, 22. Now that's better than the wolf, that's the same as the Tyrannok, and a little bit worse than the cold one chariot. Melee defense, 24, that puts it kind of below the Tyrannok and the cold one, but still above the goblin wolf. And we have weapon strength, 34, again above the goblin wolf chariot. Essentially the skeleton archer chariot would dominate the goblin wolf, even though the goblin wolf has a bit more health. Charge bonus 52, which is respectable. Again, better than the Goblin Wolf. Kind of on par with the Tyrannok one and worse than the cold ones. Ammunition 40, that's the lowest amount of ammunition, but it also has a good respectable range, second only to the Elven chariot over there at 140. And missile damage 49. So that's really not great for missile damage, but I suppose they have 12 units firing as opposed to the 8 and 4 of the other chariots respectively. And no armor piercing or anything like that either. So there we go. Chariot, respectable. I think these guys, definitely take these instead of the other chariot, because they match up statistically, if I remember correctly, 1 for 1. So you're just getting that chariot, but it can fire missiles as well. So it's not something you should maybe shy away from throwing into combat from time to time. And just consider maybe the missiles a bit of an extra bonus. Although they can be handy, they just don't do a huge amount of damage compared to the missiles from other chariots. That's the only downfall. Now we move on to the beasts, and there's only really the one beast in the Tomb King army, and that is the Carrion. And compare it to other flyers, it's a bit hard to do, because it's somewhere in the middle. So it's kind of, for me, it's between Vargeist and Harpies. It's not really anywhere near both. It's kind of bang in the middle. So 24 in a unit, you have 16 Vargeist, and stats-wise, it's got a little bit better armor than the Vargeist. Its leadership is way lower. Quicker than Vargeist and the Harpies. Melee attack 26, that's lower than the Vargeist and kind of a little bit better than the Harpies. And we have melee defense 46. Smashes the Vargeist and the Harpies, much better melee defense. Weapon strength 40, that's kind of on par with the Harpies, that's the worst of all of them. And charge bonus 12. So it's kind of, Carrion for me is a weird one, because they're quick, and they can hang around in combat a long time, but they're not particularly effective at killing. So they won't sweep up a unit of archers very quickly, but they will keep them bogged down for a while. So it makes them an interesting flying unit. And yeah, I like the little niche they fill in between these two, although yeah, obviously these fight on different factions. But, you know, they're an interesting unit, and if you need a flyer, and the legendary legion of these guys is pretty good with its armor piercing and magic damage, I think it does as well, if I remember correctly. But that's kind of how the Carrion stack up for the flyers. And we have the constructs next, the big boys of the Tomb King army. And we're starting with the Ushabti, and the Ushabti can only really be put against the big boys of the other armies. So here we go, the Croxagores, Chaos Trolls Armored, and Rat Ogres. Most health of all of these units, 100 armor, on par with the Croxagores, a little bit less than armored Chaos Trolls, and at miles more than Rat Ogres. Leadership 44, that puts it at the second lowest, only against Trolls, who kind of use running away as a tactic to go and regen for a while and then come back. Speed 54, they are as quick as the Trolls, and they're all a little bit slower than the Rat Ogres, and the Croxagores are slower than both of them. Melee attack 23, that is lower than the Croxagores, lower than the Trolls, and a little bit lower than the Rat Ogres. And the Rat Ogre stat is, these guys are all taken from the most current build. So as opposed to some of my earlier units, these guys are all on par. So we have melee defense, 35, compared to the 26, 32, 26 for the Rat Ogres. And yeah, so again, good melee defense, not as effective on the attack as some of these other units. Weapon strength 72, again the lowest of all of these, and charge bonus 18. So they can again hang around for a while. They have that higher defense, not quite as killy as the others, but they also have that higher health, so they'll stick around a lot longer. They just won't kill as quickly as some of these other units. Then we have the Ushabti of Great Bows. Now these guys are strange, and I just couldn't compare them to anything. They have a huge range, but not quite as much as an artillery piece. There's also 12 of them, which is quite a lot compared to something like an artillery piece. And they have sort of really quite high weapon strength. They can fight pretty well with armor piercing, and their missile damage is pretty significant as well. Now, these guys are fairly unique to the Tomb Kings, and I like them. And they're one of the reasons that I think they left out, I think it was the Hierotitan for the Tomb Kings, because they felt that these guys filled that niche. Now, the Hierotitan, as far as I remember, no, it's not the Hierotitan, it's the Necropolis Titan. I can't remember the name. It's the big giant, and he had essentially had a ballista, so his range would have been better than the Ushabti of Great Bows. But I see the argument. I see the argument. I don't necessarily 100% agree. I maybe 60-40 agree with it. Yeah, so these guys are a great little unit, very fun to have on, but you don't want to fill your entire army of them, because they just don't get out enough missiles to cause enough damage quickly enough. But, you know, 1 or 2 units of these guys in your army, pretty handy, and they'll do huge amounts of damage versus elite units as they come in against you, compared to something like a normal unit of archers. So then we have the Stalkers. These guys are great, but again, kind of just a large, monstrous infantry. They're very unique. They have a missile attack that does sort of magical damage, apparently, and poison and armor piercing. But yeah, they're just a good unit. So nothing really compares to these guys, plus the fact that they have Vanguard. There's not a great unit that compares to them. These guys are fairly unique in the ways you can use them in the battle for Total War Warhammer 2. But, you know, let's just put them against some other big boys as well, just to get comparison. So we got the Chaos Spawn, the Treekin, and the Trolls. Again, all the latest stats, these guys are all directly comparable, as opposed to some 1 or 2 changes from some of the earlier units. Armor, highest of them all, matches up with the Treekin. Leadership 50, lowest of them all apart from the Trolls. Speed 50, highest apart from Trolls. And then we have melee attack 24. Again, kind of low. I mean, better than Treekin, but lower than Trolls and Chaos Spawn. And we have the melee defense 36, higher than everything except for the Treekin. So again, kind of more, can last a while. Weapon strength 78. Now, compared to the Chaos Spawn, 160. And the 58 from the Treekin, 100 from the Trolls. Again, you see the theme developing. Not as killy as the Trolls or Chaos Spawn, but they will stick it out in combat for a good amount of time, and they'll make up the damage that way. And plus, considering these guys are armor piercing, and I think only the Trolls are as well. But that's pretty good weapon strength. Charge bonus 10, not great, you know, comparable to the Treekin. Ammunition for their weapons is pretty good. It's a half decent range. I think it's the same as maybe the Rangers with the axes. It's around that territory. And missile damage 107 with poison, pretty handy there. So I think these guys are really unique and a really cool unit to have in your army. I've really enjoyed playing with them. I can't recommend them enough. They're really fun. Necropolis Knights. Now, these guys are kind of a monstrous cavalry, so we tried to compare them to cavalry, which isn't necessarily called monstrous cavalry, but isn't your typical horse, shall we say. So we've got Demigryphs, Cold Ones, and Horned One Riders to compare them to. Now, their armor is lower than some of these other guys. Their unit size is much lower as well, but they do have a good amount of health. I mean, it is the second highest of all of these, second only to the Horned Ones. And they do, and sort of for the unit, each unit has the most amount of health of any of these. So each individual Necropolis Knight has a lot more health than any individual Horned One. So their armor is 90, which is kind of low. Their leadership is 60, again kind of low compared to these other guys. Speed 66, same speed as the Dread Knights. not as quick as the horned ones. Melee attack with poison, 40. That is higher than Demigryph Knights. That's higher than Dread Knights. And that is the same as horned ones. Melee defense, 36. Higher than Demigryph Knights. Lower than the Dread Knights. And higher than horned ones. And weapon strength, 55. A little bit lower than Demigryph Knights. Higher than the Cold One Dread Knights. And, you know, a little bit higher than the horned ones as well. And charge bonus 50. Now, there we go, and that's lower, that's only higher than the Dread Knights. Now, I think they could take the Dread Knights. The other two, I'm not 100% sure on. I just don't know. I think it'd be an interesting test to do. Their armor piercing and the poison. It'd be a very interesting thing to see, to do unit testing against these. But it does at least hang in this class, I think, in my opinion. The armor might let them down a bit. The fact there's so few of them might let them down in terms of just their damage output potential. But a good unit, and they really can hold their own, and are great to look at. Like, one of the great animations, just bringing them to life must have been quite a tricky thing to do. And I have to applaud Creative Assembly for that. They look fantastic. So that's the Necropolis Knights. There is also the other variety of Necropolis Knights with halberds. Now, these guys don't have shields, so we'll compare them to really the only other I kind of compare them to other monstrous infantry with like anti-large or halberds, and the direct comparison is, of course, the Demigryph Knights with halberds. And again, like the previous example, lower armor, lower speed than the Demigryphs, but same speed as Cold One Spear Riders for the Lizard Men there. 32, same as the melee attack as the Demigryph Knights. 31, melee defense is 1 better. Damage, 2, weapon strength, 2 lower. Charge bonus, a little bit lower, comparable to the Cold One Spear Riders. Now, the Cold One Spear Riders' melee attack and melee defense is much lower. So I'm pretty sure Necropolis Knights with halberds could take Cold One Spear Riders, because they do have that extra health, and their armor is essentially the same. But they don't have shields, unlike the Cold One Spear Riders. But I think that it'd be much closer with the Demigryph Knights with halberds. It'd be an interesting matchup again, like the previous cavalry example. Then we have the Tomb Scorpion, which I'm slowly falling in love with a little bit. I kind of really like the Tomb Scorpions. Their charge, which like gets them burrowing underneath, it can just skip through a unit. So it's not even that it's charging through a unit, it just goes underneath them and attacks the unit behind if the distances are right. So bear that in mind when you fight Tomb Kings, to space it out so that a Scorpion isn't within the distance that it can just miss out your front line and get straight into your missiles. That would be a very big annoyance. But yeah, so far, the Tomb Scorpion, we decided to compare to the Varghulf and the Feral Stegodon. And, you know, health-wise, a little bit lower than those two. Armor, better than the Varghulf, a little bit lower than the Stegodon. Leadership, kind of between both of them. Closer to the Stegodon. Speed, 50. That's pretty slow. Same speed as the Stegodon, though, compared to the Varghulf, much quicker. 40 melee attack. That is lower than the Varghulf, but higher than the Feral Stegodon. Melee defense, 35. Again, lower than the Varghulf, higher than the Stegodon. Weapon strength, 380. Higher than the Varghulf, lower than the Stegodon. And charge bonus, 45. Comparable to the Varghulf, but not quite as high. 5 less, and much less than the Feral Stegodon. So, interesting matchup. I think with the health of... It's hard to say. With the poison, with the low armor of the Varghulf, but it does have regenerate. I think these would all be a pretty good match. I'm not sure if the Tomb Scorpion wins either of them. I think it loses for me against the Stegodon and maybe against the Varghulf as well, but it would hold up. It would hold its own pretty significantly. And it does cause terror. I suppose they all cause terror, actually. They're all terrifying creatures. It'd be hard to say. Yeah, I think it could... I want to say it could take the Feral Stegodon. Its stats are better than Stegodon. The Stegodon has so much more health than it, and it has a lot of armor as well, and it hits hard, the Feral Stegodon. So yeah, it'd be an interesting matchup. I think it kind of sits around this territory of unit. And then we have the Khemrian warsphinx. Now, this is a bit harder to compare to. Not a lot that sort of fits into the same area as this. But what we picked was the Stegodon, the Arachnarok Spider. We thought these would go against it because they kind of both have... Now, we're going to ignore the fact that the Stegodon is an artillery piece, so we're going to ignore its range and missile damage. But they both have guys on top of them throwing down missiles, and they're both kind of big creatures. So let's have a look. Now, armor 110, that is lower than both the Stegodon and the Arachnarok Spider. Leadership 55, same as the Arachnarok. Speed 68, quicker than both. Melee attack 34, higher than the Stegodon, lower than the Arachnarok, and with the Arachnarok's poison as well. Melee defense 42, much higher than the Arachnarok, much higher than the Stegodon. Weapon strength 480, that's the highest of them all. And charge bonus 80, again, highest of both. Ammunition 200. Now, that's compared to the Arachnarok, so about the same, really. And range 140, a much better range than the Arachnarok Spider. And missile damage 44 compared to the Arachnarok's 48. The Stegodon does have the blow darts. I'm not sure what damage they do. I have to imagine it'd be in the same sort of area. But it would do poison damage as well. So that's kind of the comparison there, guys. Now, with the 10,000 health, it's not miles above the other two. But with its good damage output and its... it does have that lower melee attack, though, compared to something like the Arachnarok. But I don't know if that makes up for the 100 more weapon strength it has. Again, I think this is the kind of tier you need to think about the Khemrian warsphinx in. The Arachnarok, stuff like the War Mammoth as well could probably be thrown in here. But we're not going to see them until November, apparently. So, there we go. The Necrosphinx. Here we go. This guy is a bit unique. He himself is a monster killer. So we just threw him up against some other stuff that could potentially be considered monster killers, I suppose, which is the War Hydra and the Dragon Ogre Shaggoth. I found him very hard to compare to anything else, but here we go. I think the Shaggoths may be the best comparison. They have a lot of stuff in common, except for, oddly, the Shaggoths don't have anti-large, whereas the Dragon Ogres do. I found that a bit strange, but there we go. So... Oh, I think they do have anti-large, it just doesn't say it in their write-up here. The Dragon Ogre Shaggoths do have anti-large, so I'm being silly. I thought they did. So, armor 110, that's higher than the Shaggoth and the War Hydra. Leadership 45, lower than both. Speed 68, quicker than the War Hydra, slower than the Shaggoth. Melee attack 42, that is lower than the Shaggoth's melee attack and lower than the War Hydra's melee attack. Melee defense 50, same as the Shaggoths, much higher than the War Hydra's. Weapon strength 550, that's 100 more than the Shaggoth and way more than the War Hydra. Now, that is impressive. Well, not quite 100 more than the Shaggoth, but 90 more than the Shaggoth. That is pretty good. And then the charge bonus of 60. Now, it does have lower health than both of the other guys. Now, I do think a Necrosphinx will kill a Hydra. In my opinion. I think it could take the Hydra. Now, I think its problem comes in against a Shaggoth, with them both having anti-large. The Necrosphinx does have a better anti-large bonus. We're told it has the best anti-large bonus in the game. So I think that would be really the closest comparison. Those two going head-to-head. The Necrosphinx versus the Dragon Ogre Shaggoth would be pretty great. Alright, so that's kind of where I place the Necrosphinx. Next up, we have the Hierotitan. Now, this guy is great-ish. What I found in a game is that he will stick it out and get lots of kills, but he's in the campaign, I never had my Hierotitan get close to dying. Like, he would stick it out, and he wouldn't get a huge amount of kills, but he'd also come nowhere near death. So it's almost like I'm tempted to, like, throw him out there, let him just, like, gather all of the enemy infantry around him, do as much damage as he can, and then, like, pull him out, and then just, like, use him as a sort of damage magnet, really. But we compared to him, I just threw the Dragon Ogre Shaggoth back in there, the Giant, and the Hell Pit Abomination. The Giant's probably the fairest comparison. He has exactly the same amount of health as a Giant. Way more armor, though. 110 armor. That is huge for a sort of big giant creature like this. Way more than the Shaggoth, which is the highest of the others. And then leadership 60. Not the best leadership, actually the lowest leadership of all of these. Speed 32. Slowest of all. One has to assume that's because he's carrying around so much bloody armor. Melee attack 52. Now that is the same as the Dragon Ogre Shaggoth, but unlike the Dragon Ogre Shaggoth, both magic and fire damage. So that will be particularly effective against stuff like the Hell Pit Abomination. But again, a little bit lower melee attack than just your typical giant. And, better melee attack than the Hellpit Abomination, though. Melee defense, 52. About the same as the Dragon Ogre Shaggoth, a little bit more. Way more than a regular giant, and way more than the Hellpit Abomination. Weapon strength, 550. That is the same as the giant, with armor piercing. A little bit lower than Shaggoth, and it doesn't have anti-large like the Shaggoth. And a bit more than the Hellpit Abomination as well. Charge bonus, 20. A little bit low, about the same as the Hellpit Abomination. So that's kind of where it stacks up. Now, it really, because of that kind of high melee defense, and the melee attack isn't the highest, but it can do a lot of damage. And I believe it can. I just think maybe it's the intervals between its attacks that limit its killing power. I think maybe when they built it, it was probably like a killing machine, and they're like, maybe we have to nerf this thing a little bit. But it'll be interesting to see how it evolves if they pick it up a little bit in terms of lowering that interval of attack, just so it can get its kills up a bit. But I like it. It's just a very cool looking unit. It's fun to use. Better than a giant. In a head-to-head, I think it would take a giant just because of that high armor value and the magic and fire damage, although it does have the lower melee attack. And then we move on to the artillery section of our unit stat comparison. And we have the Screaming Skull Catapult, looking lovely there, still carrying on the tradition of carrying dead guys around ever since it was first used by a Tomb King, when they were still alive, bear in mind, versus Araby, and they tied their corpses to the... Oh, maybe it wasn't. It must have been after they were dead. And then they tied the corpses of the Araby kings to their catapults, and that's where that tradition comes in. But let's compare them to some other catapults in the game. So... With these, we're just going to look at, like, speed. It doesn't really matter. It's 20 all round. They all have 20 speed. 40 leadership seems to be the typical. The grudge throw is a little bit higher. And then melee attack and defense, it looks about the same all round, except for the grudge thrower, which has the dwarves, which are pretty good at fighting from time to time. Now, let's have a look at the stuff that's important. All of them, ammunition 22, except for the Blessed Trebuchet 25. Range, 380. Lowest range of all of these other catapults. However, it does have... discourage and armor piercing and magical damage. So that has it there. 171 though, that's higher missile damage than the grudge thrower, higher than the rock lobber, lower than the blessed field trebuchet. But there we go. It's a very high damaging catapult. Good magic damage. Just does a little bit shorter range than the rest. That's the kind of toss up, I think. It does a lot more damage, but the range is a little bit lower. And then we move on to the Casket of Souls. Now, hard to compare the Casket of Souls to other artillery, because it is, on the surface, a one-man artillery piece. Now, that is fine. But what it does, as opposed to these other artillery pieces, is it fires 4 projectiles at once. So that kind of makes it like more of a regular artillery piece. So it's kind of hard to... I'm not really sure how to judge its damage output. Now, it says missile damage 860. Now, is that divided by the 4 projectiles? That's what I don't know. I doubt it. I have to imagine every single projectile does 860, but 860 is huge. I have to imagine that is the most missile damage of any artillery piece in the game. Range 440. Again, massive range. Hell Cannon 420 in comparison. Magical damage as well, and armor piercing. Now, that's how it kind of stacks up. The Basildon has other benefits and it moves around and stuff, but I just figured I'd compare it to these ones. Kind of a good unit. And it has such a high arc of fire, just to describe it to you guys. I'm sure you guys will see it in the coming days. It has such a high arc of fire that it really does do a lot of damage to units that can be quite close in and attacking. So, look out for the Casket of Souls. And that's about it for our unit stat comparison, guys. That's how everything stacks up against some other stuff in the game. Hope that was helpful when you get into your Tomb King campaigns yourselves. It's a great little faction. I'll probably have a full review up towards the beginning of next week. And I'll let you guys know all my thoughts in detail. But that's kind of my thoughts on the individual units. Very handy. A lot of unique stuff like the Stalkers. I really like the Ushabti of Great Bows. Stuff like that doesn't really turn up in any other army. I really enjoy. Really enjoying the Tomb Kings. Can't recommend them enough. They are great fun to play, and I hope you guys get your hands on them soon. Alright guys, that's about it from me. As always, huge thank you for watching, and I hope to catch you all on the next one.